So you're thinking about starting your own veggie garden? Well, here are 5 easy things that you can start doing right now that'll help make your life easier once you're ready to properly get going. Some of them you don't actually have to leave your couch for. First one is to stop throwing out your cardboard, because I guarantee you're going to want tons of it. Something that will amaze you once you start gardening is how much less actually ends up in the recycling bin, because you're always going to have a use for cardboard, especially nice big boxes. Cardboard boxes have a lot of uses for us in the garden, but the main one that we're going to want a lot of cardboard is anytime we're starting a new garden bed, whether it be a raised bed or even in ground. Cardboard is just the most incredible material because of its ability to line the bottom, suppress weeds, but also be biodegradable that will break down anywhere between about 3 months and a year's time. Once you're properly into gardening, you are nearly never going to have enough cardboard. Like just behind me, I just rebuilt my compost area, and underneath which I have a couple layers of cardboard, and let me tell you, the whole time I was building it, I just wished that I had more. This area got really bad with weeds and grass runners, and I really want to suppress them heaps. And there are a couple areas under here that only have a single layer of cardboard, and I'm really hoping that it holds up. I'm pretty sure it won't. And speaking of compost, the other reason that you're going to want to save tons of it is because when we're doing home compost, if you don't know, there's basically 2 ingredients in compost that we call our browns and our greens. Browns are carbon rich, things like cardboard, paper, woody material, and then our greens are all of our leafy material. Home gardeners tend to going to have a lot of leafy growth that they can throw in the compost, but not a lot of browns. So any excess cardboard and even paper that you have, you can just shred up and then process it through your compost, which will later make its way back into feeding your garden. Starting a home garden is just such an incredible path to achieving a decent chunk of self-sufficiency. And as a bonus tip, if you're ever doing any pruning around the house, make sure to keep a decent amount of all the woody material. One, you can obviously compost it, even though a lot of this thicker stuff you might struggle to. But this stuff is awesome to fill the bottom of your garden beds with. It'll help save you money on soil, and it'll also help feed the microbiome that you really want in the bottom of your garden beds. The next tip is to just gain an awareness of where your shadow lines are in your property through different parts of the day. Plants need sun. The more sun we can give them, the more energy they can produce, the more plant growth, the more fruit or vegetables that they'll produce for us. In the southern hemisphere, we want our gardens to face the north because they'll get slightly more sun that way. Like on this shadow line, this is the north direction, so if I'm putting my bed over there, it's getting more sun. But every single property is different. So what's really important is for as long a period of time as possible, watch where all the different shadow lines in your property appear, and you'll start to get a good idea of what you can plant where. Because in parts of the yard that are getting sun for half the day, there's things that you're going to be able to plant there. In parts of the house that are getting no sun at all, most things that we eat aren't going to be able to grow there. The majority of what we're going to be growing needs to be sitting in as much full sun every day as possible. And you might have a few parts in the house that would look awesome with a veggie bed there, but just don't get enough sun, and unfortunately, it's not worth the trouble of trying to plant there. Like this part of my house, I would love to plant maybe a berry food forest along this fence line. But because this is the north fence, this whole patch gets next to no sun. And you can tell by the diverse amount of weeds that get here because my sun-loving grass doesn't get enough sun to outcompete those weeds. So for most food crops, if I was trying to put them here, they just wouldn't do well. The next one you can do right now, and that's join your local Facebook gardening group. As local as possible, as close to your exact suburb or city or town or even state as you can. Because there's so many little details around pests and microclimates and what you can plant when. You can shortcut having to find out a lot of that information yourself by picking the brains of locals. The other great thing is this is such an awesome way to get plants for free, because there are a lot of things that we grow that we eat that we can propagate from free cuttings or that produce abundant seeds at the end of their season. And especially now that seed packets are getting about $5 per packet, when you can just ask someone who lives around the corner from you, you're going to save yourself so much money. And this is one of the biggest differences between me as a gardener now and me when I started out. Is now if there's anything that I haven't grown before that I'm interested in growing, is search if I can grow it from a cutting and then just ask around in my local group to see if there's anyone that has that I can come and take some cuttings from. I've done it with herbs, grapevines, raspberries, strawberries, heaps of things, and you should too. And the next big one is to just start some seeds. As soon as you're starting to think about gardening, just go and buy a couple of seed packets. It'll cost you less than $10. You don't need fancy seed trays. You don't need a fancy little greenhouse. You don't even need to buy store-bought seed starting mix. Here are some alternatives for all of those that you can do on the cheap. Here's your quick guide to budget seed tray alternatives. Toilet roll holders. You can either use it as just the holder or cut it in half, or you can even cut a little slots and fold it in on itself. Egg cartons work great. Guess what these look like? That's right, little seed cells. And because it's cardboard, once the seeds have sprouted, you can just cut it up and chuck them straight in the garden. Takeaway food containers. Look, these are basically a mini greenhouse, and this is something that I still do. Things like chives and watercress, things that you just chuck a bunch in and let them sprout, I still use this for. And unless the weather's already really warm, for all of them you can just bring them inside where it's warmer and you basically have a greenhouse anyway, and then once they sprout you can start slowly moving them outside. And seeds will take around 4 weeks from when you first sow them to when they're ready to transplant in the garden. So you're going to save yourself a lot of time and money by starting them as soon as you're even thinking about starting a garden. And in terms of seed raising mix for beginners, don't buy seed raising mix. Any old potting mix that you have will be perfectly fine. Just when you're filling your seed trays, make sure that there's no big woody chunks sitting directly above your seed once you've sown them. The next one is any time that you're out and weeding the garden, stop chucking those weeds in the green waste and do this instead. And also, if you may be keen enough to have started building up a pile for compost, something I'd recommend for beginners is don't chuck your weeds that you've pulled out of your garden into that compost pile, because part of the composting process is that pile will heat up. But if you're not putting enough material in there, and as a beginner you probably don't have enough material, you're not going to create enough heat for long enough to sterilize the weed seeds in there, which means that you are potentially going to make a mistake that I've definitely made a couple of times. And you end up filling up your compost full of weed seeds that are ready to germinate, so that by the time you're chucking your compost out into your garden, you've accidentally just filled your garden beds with weed seeds that just keep popping up over and over again. Here's what to do instead. Unfortunately for this demonstration, all my garden beds are pretty weed free at the moment. But any weeds that you do pull out, instead of chucking in the green waste or in the compost, you are going to all just chuck in a bucket. And then what you're going to do with this bucket is fill it up with water. Fill it up with as much weeds as you can, fill it up with water. Chuck a lid on it and then just go and leave it somewhere for a couple weeks. And you can leave it for as long as you want, just the 2 weeks is about the minimum that you're going to need. And then what we've done is we've started our very own fertilizer that we can use in the garden. All you need to do though is just strain off any plant material and especially seeds, and then just water our garden with the water from this as much as once a week. The water helps pull out all of the nutrients from these weeds that we then get to chuck in the garden, and we get to filter out all of the seeds. Awesome. And I actually needed to fertilize my garden today, so this was a great time to film this tip. Speaking of which, if you're enjoying this, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. If you're new here, I try to make gardening as approachable as possible. I try to cut out a lot of the BS and making it as cheap as possible. I'm still fairly new and I really value every single subscriber, so please make sure to hit subscribe, please hit like. And if there are any gardening questions that you have, make sure to drop them in the comments and I'll definitely get back to you. A gardening tip that I wish I knew sooner and you can actually do from your couch right now is this. Have you ever been out and about, saw a plant that you like the look of and not known what it is? Or been walking around your garden bed, seen something pop up and you're not sure if it's a weed or something that you want to keep? Well, welcome to one of the #1 tools for gardeners in the 21st century, Google Lens. When we first moved into this house, there were a few trees around that I had no idea what they were. And since they weren't any fruiting tree that I knew of, I was going to cut them down and then replace them with something like a lemon tree. But upon pulling out Google Lens and taking a scan of it, I found out that this is actually a lily-pilly tree, which is an Australian native that produces a delicious edible berry. It tastes like an apple with more herbal notes. It's delicious. A few tips for getting a quality read out of Google Lens is if it has a fruit or flower, make sure to get that in frame. If not, get a really close-up shot of some leaves. You may not always get back the exact cultivar of that plant, but you can at least probably find the family that it's in to then do your own research and work out what it is. And if you want a bunch more gardening tips that will help you over a range of situations through your gardening journey, make sure to check out my last tip video. See you next time.
Is this really happening? I can't believe it's true. I'm just disappointed.